Today we're talking about a chess tactic known as a skewer, which is where you attack one high value piece, forcing it to move out of the way, and then you capture another lower value piece behind it. It's very similar to a pin, except the order is flipped. So if you imagine if I take this exact same position and I flip the king and the knight around, I could play rook to h6 here and get a pin. The knight is prevented from moving, or the king would be put in check. Well, a skewer is the exact same thing, except we attack the high value piece first, in this case force the king to move out of the way, and then we take the piece behind it. So if you ever see undefended pieces that are in line with a king or a queen, you want to be on the lookout. You might have a skewer tactic available. Now, this is a super basic example. Obviously, it can be much more complicated, and that's what we're going to do now. We're going to go through a bunch of examples, starting with very easy, basic ones, going all the way up to some master level, very difficult ones. So let's go ahead and get started. Right, here's the first position. It's black to play. What should black play here? Well, if you had a chance to look at that and you said rook to f2, you are correct. The point is we're putting the king in check, forcing it to move, and then once it moves somewhere, we're going to simply take the rook behind the king. And even though the king is still defending it, we have our king attacking, and so white's unable to take our rook. So very simple, and remember what I said, if you see a king in the same rank or file or diagonal as another piece, see if you have a skewer tactic available, just like we did here. Let's go to the next one. Again, it is black to play. What is black's best move in this position? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at this one, if you look at the king, you might notice that there's a rook here, and they are almost in line, but not quite because our pawn is here. So we have to set this one up, but it's very easy to do. We simply bring the bishop back with check, and notice how the white king is out of options. It's forced to take our pawn, and as soon as it does that, we follow up with rook to c3. There's the skewer. The king now has to move, and we simply take the rook. All right, here's the next one. It's black to play. What is black's best move? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, the move that black should play here is bishop to g4. It's defended by the knight. It's attacking the queen, the high value piece, forcing it to move away, or we're just going to take it. And then once it moves, we're going to take the rook behind. So it doesn't always have to be on the king. Here's an example of the queen and the rook being skewered. So the queen moves somewhere, and you have to be careful here. We can't just take it immediately, or we would lose our queen, but we can simply throw in the queen trade first, and then we can take the rook. And another little detail here is that if this rook tries to come down here and take our knight, we also can take here. And so there's a few more things going on in the position, but the basic idea is very simple. Simply attack the queen and the rook is behind, and we take it. All right, here's the next one. It's black to play. What move should black play here? All right, if you had a chance to look at this, so when you first look at this position, you might be thinking there's not really any skewers available. However, if you notice that we have the option to sacrifice our queen, which lures the pawn away, and then our rook can come down, now you can see the skewer on the king and the rook. Another part of this puzzle that you would have to understand is that it's a good trade to give up our queen if we're able to get 3 pieces. And 3 pieces is almost always a good trade for the queen, especially since 2 of them are rooks. If we simply add up the points that we're going to be getting, 5, 10, 13 points, queens are worth 9, it makes a lot of sense to make that trade. So the best move was to capture here, followed by the check. King has to move somewhere, and then we take the rook. And by the way, if the queen did attack our rook, we are not trapped. We can always come back and escape. And the 3 pieces is going to be better than the queen, as long as you're smart about how you use them. All right, here's the next one. It's black to play. What move should black play here? If you had a chance to look at that, the move is simply capturing the rook. And once the queen takes, now we can slide our rook over, skewering the queen and the bishop, forcing the queen to move so that they don't lose their queen. And then we simply take the bishop. So again, another example of how it's with the queen and not the king. Okay, so be looking for the queen and the king as well. All right, here's the next position. It's black to play. What move should black play here? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is bishop to h4 check, and we can see the skewer here. This is pretty obvious, but the one part about this that you might have been thinking about is that our rook is actually going to be taken at the end of this, right? So is it still a good idea? And the answer is yes, it is, and it has to do with the fact that if white does take our rook, we have the follow-up to take the rook over here. And so here's a good example of how the skewer in and of itself was pretty basic. We go here, we take the rook. But there was a little extra part to it in that even though our rook was attacked, we could also take white's rook. And so you had to follow that through if you were, thinking through that. All right, let's go to the next one. Here it's white to play and win. What should white play? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the initial idea of a skewer here doesn't work. We can't just go here and try to skewer the queen because the king would simply take us. So that's one point. And also the king can move here and defend the queen. So it kind of looks like there's no skewer available, but there's one really clever idea, and it's to move queen to e8 check. And what we are doing is forcing the king to go to somewhere that it doesn't want to go to. Okay, it only has 2 legal moves. If you look at our pawns and our queen, we're controlling all of these squares, which means the king has to either go up or it has to come over here. If it comes over here, there's this idea of queen to e2 checkmate. Notice how the pawns are defended and everything is taken away. The king has no squares. So that's kind of one part of it that you had to see. The other part of it is that if the king comes up here, well, now the skewer comes into play. We simply go over to h8, and we've seen this idea before, right? So again, another example of how the skewer was there, but it was mixed in with a couple of other things, including, this checkmate idea if the king went here. So usually, very rarely is it just a very simple skewer like, oh, there's a king and a queen and I just move in and take it. No, usually it's like mixed in as we see in this example. All right, let's keep going. Here you go. White to play. What move should white play here? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, the move here is actually knight takes e5, and it looks like, okay, we're getting a queen, we're losing a queen, it's just a trade, but you had to notice that there's a follow-up move, rook to c8 check, and here we get the skewer on the king and the rook. Remember, you cannot castle if you are in check. That's an illegal move, so you have to move out of the way, and we simply take the rook in the corner. Now, this one was interesting because you could also have played rook to c8 check first, trying to lure the bishop away, and then you take here with your knight. But this is not nearly as good of a trade, primarily because now black can castle. Yes, you got, let's just say, a slight advantage by doing that, by winning the queen, but black's going to have some active pieces. They're going to start developing, and the game's going to go on. If we compare that to this line, after you do this and take here, black is really in trouble because now you have a pin, and so if this knight ever tries to leave, the rook is going to get captured, and so both of these pieces are kind of stuck in the corner, and that's why this is such a much better line for white. All right, let's keep going. All right, here's the next one. It's white to play and win. What move should white play? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, so if we think about skewers, you might be thinking about, okay, a king and maybe a queen. They're not even on the same diagonal right now, but could we force them to go onto the same diagonal? And the answer is yes, we can. Queen to f7 check forces the king to go where it doesn't want to go, and then we simply drop back to f8, and here we go. We can see the skewer, and we win the queen for free. All right, so we've seen a couple of these at the end of the game where you have to play a move that forces the king to go somewhere that it doesn't want to go, and then you have the skewer. So it's not always immediately obvious. Sometimes you have to set it up by forcing the king or the queen to go somewhere that it doesn't want to go. Okay, let's keep going. White to play. What move should white play? All right, if you had a chance to look at that again, we can see the king and the queen on the same diagonal. Remember, whenever you see that, you want to ask yourself, do I have a skewer? And at first glance, it's like, no, I don't have it because the king would just take me, right? However, again, we see the same idea. We can play bishop to a3 check, and where's the king going to go? Again, it doesn't have a lot of options. Only option is to move here. And what does that do for us? Well, now queen c7 actually does skewer the king and the queen. So they move, we take the queen. So again, we see how we had to set it up by playing that bishop a3 check move first. All right, here's the next one. It's black to play and win. Keep in mind, white's pawns are going down this way. Black's pawns are going forward like this. Black to play and win. All right, if you had a chance to look at that, so white's in trouble. The king is not in a good position. We're up a knight. However, there is the pawn over here that is the kind of the only problem for black in this position. And so the winning move is queen takes h2 check. And again, we're going to see the same idea of forcing the king where it doesn't want to go, has to go over here. We follow that up with h5 check again. And if you look carefully, it doesn't have a lot of options. You have either here or here. If you go to g5, we simply take here and we get a simple fork. right? The king's going to have to move, and then we can get rid of that passed pawn and go into a winning endgame. Or if the king moves here, queen to f2 check, again, forces the king to either go right there again or to go here. And now we have the skewer on a pawn. And so it doesn't always have to be a high value piece. In this case, that pawn was very dangerous. And so here we need to use the skewer to win the pawn, right? And we go into this winning endgame because we have the extra knight, and it should be a pretty easy win. Okay, so that one was a bit longer. You had to kind of calculate a few moves ahead, but it was pretty straightforward in that white didn't have a lot of options, and we could pretty easily force the king away from the defense of the pawns and ultimately clean up this guy. This is pretty common at the end of the game when you have a queen and your opponent's king is exposed. If you ever see pawns that are undefended, there's a very good chance they could become targets. Okay, so keep that in mind. Let's go to the next one. All right, so here's the last position I have for you. This one is very difficult, but give it your best shot. It's black to play and win. What should black play? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that. So this one, you know, we're down a lot of material. White has a queen, 2 rooks, a knight, a pawn that's about to become a queen, but we do have a queen and a knight in white's face. And so if we can figure out something, either get a checkmate or take some of these rooks, maybe we can win back enough material. So that being said, the move is queen to g1 check, which forces the king to go here. And the reason we wanted to do that was because queen to g2 check is a skewer. It's a skewer on the rook. Now, it might not look like it because you might be thinking, well, can't the king just move? And we don't really want to take that because it's defended, right? And you're absolutely right. If we did this, we would just lose. This is a terrible idea. But if the king goes back here, we actually just have queen to f1, which leads to checkmate. They have to block, and we just take it. This is checkmate. So because of that idea, this is not a valid move for white. It's a losing move, which means they have to come up here. And now the skewer that we had actually makes sense, and we can take the rook. With check, they have to move somewhere. And then there's one more move here, which you kind of needed to see to know that this was a good position, b2. And now we're actually going to threaten to get a queen. And if white trades, we take, the knight's defending, and black is actually losing. So very complicated position. But what I wanted you to take away was that there was a skewer kind of hidden within this position. And we've seen this before in these types of videos. You learn one type of tactic. It's just a small part of a position that has a whole bunch of other things going on at the same time, right? We saw a checkmate threat, right, with queen to f1. We saw, if they go here after this, we saw pushing the pawn and promoting was a threat. The idea that the queen was defended by the knight. If this happens, we take here, so white can't really get away with that. And so there's lots of things going on, but the skewer did exist, even in a position where kind of doesn't look like there would be a skewer there, but there was, right? So hopefully that makes sense, and you guys got some practice with the skewer tactic. It shows up in a lot of different ways. Keep an eye out for when you see kings and queens on the same files and ranks and diagonals as other pieces. There might be a potential for a skewer tactic. All right, I'll see you guys next time. As always, stay sharp, play smart, and take care.